The last 24 hours, many of you may have noticed this, a potential boycott. Is it going to come to that? Of the 2026 World Cup has been suggested as potential leverage against Donald Trump.
We are, of course, looking ahead to the World Cup this summer, or, Mark Ogden, are we looking forward to a World Cup this summer? Paul Hayward in The Observer says a World Cup boycott.
For months, the 2026 World Cup has been sold as a sure thing. A giant summer festival stretched across North America, packed stadiums, record TV numbers, and enough sponsor money to make FIFA's accountants sleep like babies. The kind of event that feels too big to wobble. Then, a different kind of headline started forming, not from protesters in the street or viral outrage online, but from inside the sport itself, a senior figure in German football. DFB Vice President Oke Gittlich didn't shout. He didn't posture. He simply said the quiet part out loud, that Germany should seriously consider boycotting the 2026 World Cup. That one sentence changes the atmosphere instantly, because Germany isn't a random federation throwing a tantrum for attention. In global football, Germany is one of the anchors. It carries history, leverage, and a fan base that pulls massive audiences across Europe, Africa, and beyond. When Germany signals doubt, everyone else starts doing the math. Not the emotional kind, the cold, spreadsheet kind. And that's what made this feel different from the usual World Cup controversy cycle. This wasn't a trending hashtag that burns out in 48 hours. It was institutional uncertainty, delivered with the kind of careful wording that usually means people have already been discussing it behind closed doors once the word boycott enters the conversation at that level. The World Cup stops feeling like a celebration and starts feeling like a negotiation dot, because FIFA can talk about keeping politics out of football all it wants. But a tournament hosted by countries is automatically tied to politics. Visas decide who can attend. Border policy decides who can travel. Diplomatic relationships decide how safe, welcome, or complicated the whole experience feels. You can't separate match schedules from the real world when the real world controls the doors. The destabilizing part wasn't just the possibility of Germany not showing up. It was what that possibility does to everything around it. Sponsors don't pay billions for a World Cup in theory. They pay for the predictable gravity of major teams, the matchups that guarantee global attention, the familiar names that keep casual viewers watching. Broadcasters lock in contracts assuming the biggest European nations will be present, competitive, and visible. Advertising rates are built on the expectation that the tournament is stacked with top-tier brands on the pitch, so when Germany publicly allows the idea of staying home to become reasonable, it rattles the whole structure. Even if nothing happens, the doubt alone becomes expensive. Doubt makes lawyers reread clauses. Doubt makes sponsors ask what happens if key teams aren't there. Doubt makes broadcasters question whether they overpaid for a product that might look smaller than promised. And Germany didn't pull that history card by accident, either. Referencing past Olympic boycotts isn't nostalgia. It's a reminder this has happened before. And when it happens, the event still goes on. But the legitimacy takes a hit that doesn't fully heal. The smartest part of Gittlich's move is that he didn't need to announce anything. He just needed to make the idea credible. Once it's credible, FIFA has a problem. Because now participation isn't automatic, it's conditional. And once participation becomes conditional, power starts shifting away from the governing body and back toward the nations. At the same time, the reaction across Europe wasn't loud, which is exactly why it mattered. A few federations chose cautious language instead of confident commitments. Denmark acknowledged sensitivities. French voices avoided sounding locked in. In the UK, the tone and coverage shifted from "that'll never happen" to "what if it does?" None of it looked like a coordinated campaign. It looked like the early stage of something worse for FIFA. Normalized hesitation. That kind of hesitation spreads without needing a megaphone. You don't need 10 federations to hold a press conference. You just need enough uncertainty that planning becomes guesswork. Because imagine the tournament, missing multiple European giants. Not fringe teams, but the ones that pull the world's attention. The ones that make group stages feel like an event, not a warm-up. A World Cup without that weight doesn't just change who wins. It changes the entire value of the product. And then comes the uncomfortable question. FIFA doesn't like to answer. What happens if the world decides the host country feels like part of the controversy? A big chunk of the anxiety here is tied to the United States portion of the tournament, not stadium quality, not ticket sales. The optics and the unpredictability, immigration and enforcement. Diplomatic tension, the fear that travel could feel conditional, messy, or hostile depending on where you're from, what passport you carry, or how the political wind is blowing that week. That's where the story stops being football gossip and turns into a serious risk discussion. Fans can't create a World Cup atmosphere from their couches. The tournament depends on movement, on people crossing borders, on supporters showing up in huge numbers. If fans start believing it's safer to stay home and watch on TV, the mood of the event changes. If federations start believing their supporters could face unpredictable treatment, it becomes a political issue whether they like it or not. This is also where the irony bites. The 2026 World Cup was supposed to look like a victory lap. Modern stadiums, big cities, big money, big production. Instead, the loudest question in the room becomes, will everyone even feel welcome enough to come? And here's the part that's easy to miss. While FIFA is trying to keep the spotlight on hype, to co-hosts benefit from simply looking calm. Canada and Mexico don't need to attack the United States. They don't need to pitch themselves as replacements. They only need to appear stable, predictable, and ready. That's the power move. Offer a safe landing without making it look like a political coup. Mark Carney's approach, in particular, is interesting because it's built on silence and positioning. No dramatic calls, no public feuds, just a steady emphasis on reliability and rule of law. Messaging that gives other nations something they can publicly agree with. Because if a federation decides to reduce its exposure to the U.S. part of the tournament, it can frame that decision as logistics and stability, not a moral crusade. That framing gives political cover. Mexico has its own advantage, experience, and reputation. It has hosted before. It understands the scale. It can project readiness without begging for attention. In moments of uncertainty, quiet competence looks like leadership. And the more that uncertainty grows, the more plausible it becomes that marquee matches, major fan travel, and the emotional center of the tournament could tilt away from the U.S., even if the official schedule remains the same on paper. That's how credibility shifts, not through a dramatic announcement, but through the simple reality that people plan around risk into that environment. Even voices with complicated histories can shape the narrative. When Sepp Blatter backed fan boycott talk aimed at U.S. matches, it mattered less because he holds power now, and more because he's still a globally recognized former FIFA president. His support adds a kind of permission for skeptics to speak louder, even if many people can't stand him. He echoed concerns tied to travel risk and unpredictable enforcement, pushing the idea that watching from home might be safer than showing up. Again, whether someone agrees or not, it feeds the same core issue, uncertainty, and uncertainty is contagious. The situation becomes even more combustible when travel restrictions and entry rules are perceived as shifting targets. When certain countries' fans worry they may be barred or delayed, it sends a signal that the tournament isn't equally accessible. That's poison for an event that sells itself as global. Then you have Gatlick's broader framing, which goes beyond stadiums and schedules. He's not talking like a marketer. He's talking like someone drawing lines, values, boundaries, and the point where silence turns into complicity. That language lands differently because he comes from a club, Culture St. Pauli, known for blending sport with political identity, not pretending the two are always separate. And once that framing is out there, it becomes harder for other federations to dismiss the question without looking like they're dodging it. You also start seeing echoes elsewhere. Opposition leaders in South Africa calling for withdrawal, lawmakers in the UK urging serious consideration, petitions in the Netherlands building enough public pressure that federations have to respond. Even if they respond carefully, none of that requires one unified movement. It just requires enough people pushing in the same direction that the idea of boycotts stops sounding extreme and starts sounding debatable. That's the nightmare scenario for FIFA. FIFA's authority has always leaned on an assumption. Participation is a given. Teams qualify, they show up, the machine rolls on. The moment a powerhouse nation treats not showing up as a legitimate option, that assumption cracks. And when that cracks, everything changes for future tournaments too. Hosts won't be judged only by infrastructure and money. Diplomacy and stability become part of the hosting package. How allies are treated matters. Whether fans feel welcome matters. Whether entry rules feel consistent matters.